And tonight's other movie is a exploitation vampire well, yeah, I guess kind of horror comedy from 1974. And tonight's other movie is Blood for Dracula, also known as Andy Warhol's Dracula, Andy Warhol Presents Dracula, and many, many other titles. Actually, I'm pretty sure those are the only titles. So, this is another film that is a kind of art house adaptation that is produced by Andy Warhol, and all I really know about it is that it's a version of Dracula, the classic tale Dracula, which, in my honest opinion, the best adaptation of Dracula is Nosferatu from 22, which I think is the best. But the movie is about the Count himself traveling to Italy with his servant in order to find a bride. There's also some kind of like subplot in there about him only being able to drink the blood of virgins, and in this movie, Roman Polanski, the director of Rosemary's Baby, makes an appearance apparently. So let's watch. So, Blood for Dracula opens up much like Flesh for Frankenstein did, with credits, and credits in the same font, I might add, with something, next to it, or coming, like, down, or, something else in the frame as the credits kind of rolled by. And same as Flesh for Frankenstein, it has good music, but this music is far better than the music in Flesh for Frankenstein. This time, it's Udo Kier in the frame as Dracula, and he's putting on makeup while looking in the mirror, which is funny because it's you later see that he was looking in the mirror the entire time, but he has no reflection. Dracula meets with his, like, servant associate, who, tells him, look, you need to drink the blood of a virgin in order to live longer. I mean, you know this. So, we need to go to Italy, where most of the... Okay, then. Where most of the, young women that are of marrying age are virgins because of the church. So that's what he does. He goes there. He travels there, and I would like to say that even though Udo Kier's performance as Dracula in this film is still very entertaining, and he still has the kind of cheesy accent that's on par with Tommy Wiseau's accent in The Room, it's not as funny because he's not constantly yelling and saying really ridiculous things. The dialogue he has in this film, while it is very quotable, it's not as ridiculous and fun. So, yeah. So apparently this version of Dracula is one of the kinds of, he's supposed to be a vampire, and he can go out in sunlight, but I think the thing I think is cool about this is, they made it to where vampires can actually be killed, other than with, stake through the heart, or sunlight, or garlic. And yes, garlic is actually a factor. It's actually mentioned in the film, but instead of going out in the sunlight and dying, he can go out in the sunlight. I'm sure if he stays out for too long, it'll hurt him, but he can go out in the sunlight. And I think, like, the thing they made to make it like, oh, well, he can go out in the sunlight, but if he doesn't drink the blood of a virgin every so often, he will die, and he will get very sick and die. So I honestly think that's a pretty cool little twist to the movie. So the acting in the movie, same as the previous film, is okay. Everybody turns in a decent performance. Same with the writing. The writing is still decent. The makeup effects, as I said before, are good. The gore effects are cheesy. The characters are not too complex. They don't constantly change or anything, although Dracula is easily one of the most likable characters, and his assistant is also probably a close second for the most likable character, because his assistant, it seems like they kind of switched roles in this film, because this time the assistant, like, servant is more ridiculous and over the top and saying funny things, and the movie, and I'll be honest, the movie actually focuses a bit more on the servant trying to get the virgins to Dracula than it does on Dracula going out for the virgins, so that's kind of a negative I have to mention. But this film still really is, it's still really, really entertaining movie. The film, just like in Flesh for Frankenstein, has a very, like, Hammer horror look and feel to it. Again, I've never seen a Hammer horror film, at least as far as I know. I'm pretty sure I own at least one of them, but I haven't watched any of them. I'm sure I'll get around to them eventually. I know there's a couple that I'm interested in. I'm definitely interested in checking out some of the ones with Christopher Lee as Dracula, but for now, I do know the look and style of a Hammer horror film. I've seen clips from them and stuff like that. So the camera work here is also really, really nice, and it's a bit better than the camera work in the previous one. The sound mix is also very well done. I'm not gonna lie. The sound mix is probably is better than it is in Flesh for Frankenstein. The lighting is also really good. The music is also absolutely fantastic in this film, and it's definitely better than the music in Flesh for Frankenstein. I'm making a lot of comparisons here because they're basically like brothers, and they're basically brothers. They're made by the same people. They're both reimaginings of classic horror stories, and I would have loved to see this go on. And I'll be honest, I would have loved to see this series go on to the point that we had, like, I don't know, fucking, I gotta come up with a really good one. Bandages for the Mummy, like something ridiculous like that. Like, if it would have kept going and going, I probably would have kept watching the series, and I probably would love it. But sadly, there's only 2 films in this somewhat series, even though they're not really connected. So the pacing in this one was actually pretty decent, for, you know, the most part. And because this film does have campy effects, and it is very campy in the way that it portrays its characters, for some reason that doesn't ruin the, kind of atmosphere and, pacing of the film. It probably has to do with the fact that even though this film is, well, this film isn't as equally perverse in nature and plot-wise, but I would still say it probably has the same amount of nudity and sex in it. But still, I feel like Flesh for Frankenstein, like, the main plot point was him building a monster to fuck another monster to create, like, zombie Frankenstein babies. Frankenstein's monster babies, so that's, yeah, it's not as perverse and over the top as Flesh for Frankenstein, which is why I think the atmosphere in the film holds up pretty well. Also, as I said before, really good lines in this, really good dialogue delivered, really quotable dialogue from Udo Kier and the guy who was the servant. I can't remember his name, his real name, for the life of me. I don't fucking know anymore. On the gore meter from 1 to 10, 1 being something like Nosferatu, which is a version of Dracula, and 10 being something like Brain Dead, Blood for Dracula is probably a 3. It is startlingly low on the gore, and honestly that's not a bad thing for me. There's just something about the film. The film has a style. Like, you see that they're in, like this is at least supposed to be in, like, the early 1800s. Everybody's living in castles, there's peasants, and, like, the, you know, things are happening. I'm pretty sure they mention, like, Karl Marx in the film. They mention the Communist Manifesto being written, and I forget when that was published, but I'm sure it wasn't in the 40s, but at this time, you know, in this big-ass house and castle, they have, like, working toilets and bathtubs, like modern toilets and bathtubs, and and they talk about reading magazines, so it's kind of a mashup of timelines, which honestly gives the film a really cool kind of style. Just like in Flesh for Frankenstein, I didn't point this out, but there's a scene, like during the entire film, it really holds up, like the whole, oh, this is like the 1800s or 1600s in like fucking Serbia, and it definitely holds up pretty well. Then you see inside the Baron's laboratory a clock on the wall, like a battery-operated clock. It doesn't have cords or anything coming out. It's a battery-operated clock, and I don't think those were out back in the time when they needed torches to light rooms. So, yeah. Okay, but yeah, no, for the gore, it's a 3. There's like 1 decapitation in the entire film. And there's 1 scene of impaling and like some neck biting, which really isn't that bad at all. There's one thing I'd like to say before I get to my final wrap-up. I'd like to say that this is the only movie where you will see Count Dracula attempt to suck the blood out of a loaf of bread. That happens in this movie. Okay, so although I prefer Flesh for Frankenstein because it's a far more cheesy, entertaining movie, this movie is still absolutely awesome. Like, it is better than Flesh for Frankenstein from almost every standpoint. The thing is, when I went into Blood for Dracula, I expected the same thing as Flesh for Frankenstein. I expected something, you know, kind of goofy and cheesy and over the top. And, I mean, it is a little bit over the top at times, but other than a few moments here and there, it's really not as, like, entertainingly campy. But it still tells a pretty cool, interesting story, so I'd probably have to give it a 4.5 out of 5, 9 out of 10. Like, this one is really, really fucking solid, and I would highly recommend it. If you're only going to watch one of these, you know, if you have a choice between watching Flesh for Frankenstein and Blood for Dracula, and you want something that's a bit more, that's not, you know, as stupid and cheesy, I would definitely go for something like Blood for Dracula instead of Flesh for Frankenstein. Now I'm gonna go watch the new Blu-ray of Mallrats that I bought today. I'll see you guys next time.